first topic, high level. Let's get in that time machine, go 88 and go 20, what year is it, 2017?
2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Mario, it's already, all right. We're going to go to 2028 and talk about what are the things that are happening in 2028, what are the things that need to happen to get there, and what are the things that are happening now to start setting that trajectory out. But first, who are you and what is it you do here?
Sure, I'll kick that off. My name's Deepan Parikh. I run a fund called Courtside Ventures, which invests in early stage companies across sports, media, and gaming, mainly seed and Series A. Main focus for us is around content, so everything across the content lifecycle from content creation, capture, distribution, data-driven, and consumption. So we're looking for different platforms and technologies that help facilitate that.
I'm Chris Pantoja, and I oversee the NBA's mobile partnerships globally, as well as our direct-to-consumer business, which includes live streaming of our games in over 200 countries. And really our focus of the league is all about bringing content to people on the platforms where they are, where they want to consume. And an interesting fact, which a lot of people don't realize about the NBA, particularly here in the US, is that almost a third of our players are from somewhere outside the US. Mm-hmm. And so what makes that really interesting is when you think about markets around the world where mobile is really the prevalent way in which people consume content, over pay TV even, it's interesting because that's part of our focus on technology is how do we bring that content to those fans. And particularly when you have a player from a given country, they develop a very quick fan base in country that are watching their guy in the big league. So really exciting and look forward to the discussion.
Tribes around players across the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I'm Ben Silverman. I oversee digital products and platforms for A&E Networks. And A&E Networks made an investment in the National Women's Soccer League, so sort of a new, interesting business model approach, which we'll get into. But I oversee NWSL Media when I'm not doing my A&E job, which is the joint venture between National Women's Soccer League and A&E Networks. And NWSL Media is responsible for all of the digital operations for the league, all of the licensing of rights and the broadcast, media sales, and e-commerce. So it's an awesome opportunity to help grow the best women's soccer league in the world. Features Alex Morgan, Carly Lloyd, a bunch of international stars, Sam Kerr from Australia, Marta from Brazil, and it's just great to be a part of.
Great. So we talk about kind of the future. Start with an easy one. What are the two trends that you're seeing now in the market that you're seeing startups maybe popping up to go and solve?
Sure. So I think the first one, you mentioned it in the intro, which is personalization. Ad-supported is struggling to some extent, and I think we're going to continue to see that. I think subscription is something that's really interesting, but in order to get someone to pay for something, you got to have personalized content. And so I think that's one huge trend that we're focusing on, especially around sports content. The second, I think, is removing the reliance on large cable companies. I think the Amazon deal was really interesting with UFC recently. First time you can get pay-per-view content without actually having a cable subscription. It is, still have to register for Amazon. You don't need to be a Prime subscriber though. So I think the barriers in terms of which takes to watch content will only continue to decrease.
Chris?
Yeah, so I think, to add to that, because I like the personalization, one of the other things that I think we see is this appetite for experiences. And so really wanting experiential moments in life, either, on your own or with friends. And so one of the things that we're very focused on is bringing people closer to the game through technology. And, we know that our audience is very intrigued by the game. The game is kind of front and center. When you're actually at a game, it's amazing. But less than 1% of our fans worldwide actually ever get to attend a game in person. And so therefore, it's really important for us to engage augmented reality, virtual reality, interactive games, different types of content that are interesting to different fans, the storytelling type content, that type of thing to really engage broadly. So I think, bringing different and new experiences through which people can be part of the game is really important.
Cool. Maybe Evan, you want to talk about the unique business model and what the future
Yeah, and
holds?
I would just echo, so this might be a little bit funny coming from someone who works for a television company, but I would echo what Deepan said, that the digital platforms are completely transforming sort of the way that sports business works. And if you look at what A&E and the National Women's Soccer League did in conjunction with Verizon, it's the perfect example. So NWSL Media licensed the rights to the domestic linear broadcast to Lifetime. There's a game of the week on Saturday afternoons on Lifetime 23 times a year. And we sold the domestic linear streaming rights to Verizon. So we were on Go90 last year. All other games for the league were there. And I think the rise of digital platforms has given growing leagues like the NWSL just the opportunity to reach fans and reach them at a scale that they may not have had in the past. Television is still obviously a huge, huge opportunity. I'm not minimizing that. But I do think that the reach of some of these emerging digital platforms are really starting to sort of change the landscape for sports that may not be the big four leagues.
Yeah. And when you think about those digital platforms in the future, what do you think those evolve to 10 years from now? What does that look like for the fan? Content-wise, how do you produce that content? What does all that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a little bit in the same position as the NBA, nowhere as large, certainly, but we have a global game, obviously. We have a global audience. The NWSL features all of the U.S. women's national team players, but also features all of basically the World Cup players from around the world, England, Australia, Brazil. So you mentioned this, I think, in your intro remarks. A lot of what we're starting to see is, if you're a soccer fan, it truly is a year-round experience now. So the NWSL plays from March through September. A lot of those players then go play in the W League in Australia. So we spend a lot of time sort of producing content around the game of soccer itself. Obviously, that helps grow interest in the NWSL, but we are promoting the W League and helping tell that stories and players who play in both leagues. So it's really about kind of bridging that experience 12 months a year.
Thoughts?
Yeah, so I think, when you talk about different experiences or approaches to reach fans and so forth, I think some of what we've seen recently, and I think it plays out kind of over time on different platforms, really comes down to the way in which we price and package the content, as well as what the content is. And so one of the things that over the last couple of seasons, we've actually introduced the ability for fans to purchase a single game. And really starting to look at, is it a single game? Is it a particular team that they want to consume? Is it some number of games that they can pick throughout the season? And I know in our partnership, we, as you know, Christian, we've announced an expanded relationship with Verizon across all of Verizon's platforms, Yahoo, Complex, AOL, and of course Verizon Mobile. And the ability to actually get fans those smaller bite-sized packages is great when you talk about these different digital platforms like a Verizon or like some of the others. So I think, that's some of the exciting innovation and learning that we've done is how do fans actually want to consume us? Most recently, we've seen a lot of growth in monthly packages. So as opposed to the season-long, fans saying, hey, I want to buy monthly and I want to consume in a way that's comfortable for me. So I think those are some of the trends that will continue with these new platforms as well.
LeBron's on a hot streak in February. I just want the February package.
Right, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective on how we also view what the leagues or consuming content looks like. We're investors in a company called TAP, which I think works with the NBA on a few items in some other leagues. The whole premise is how do you create accessibility to content wherever you are and in whatever format the fan wants. And I think one big area we focus on, I'm sure everyone here's talked a lot about, is around esports, right? So in terms of the interactivity and the relationship you can build directly with the streamer or the player, I think that's setting a whole new bar in terms of how people are going to expect to view content, have a relationship down the road. One interesting thing we've kind of learned over time is brands, at the end of the day, sports teams are brands, right? And they are trying to build as large of a presence as they can, both locally, nationally, and globally. When we first started talking to pro sports teams around esports and their involvement in esports, it was very much, how do I just fill the funnel in terms of getting more potential season ticket holders down the road? And that was their main initiative behind esports. Now, if you talk to a lot of teams, it's kind of accepted the fact that maybe that fan is not necessarily just going to translate into a NBA fan on day one. But maybe if the NBA is also involved, and just using for example, involved in 2K or involved in other games over time, that's a way to just build an audience, right? You want to be able to present the best quality of content, obviously in your sport, but also I think a lot of leagues are going to have to expand in terms of their offering in order to kind of fulfill the appetite of fans over time.
And speaking of those fans, it's not like there's one diehard fan persona that you can copy and paste across different leagues, right? Everyone's got different history with sport, across different sports. You talked personalization earlier. Maybe you two can talk a little bit about what does a soccer fan look like? Maybe what does a women's soccer fan look like? How does that differ? What does that look like for the NBA? How does that look different globally than domestically? Because ultimately, as we get more and more data about those consumers, that's how we're going to better create experiences for them. So it'd be interesting to get your take on what do we know about them today, how are they evolving, and then maybe how we can get to a future experience that targets each one.
Sure. If I could just touch on one point first, to that notion of, hey, we've got esports and how do we get them into the stadium, and maybe seeing people shift the way they think about that. The traditional way to think about A&E networks would be, hey, and working with the NWSL was, hey, how do we drive people, to watch the game of the week? And it's all about the Nielsen rating. Just to touch a little bit on the business model, we realized while television is extremely important and it's going to help change the perception of the Lifetime brand and be an opportunity with sponsors, what we did was A&E Networks actually bought a 25% stake in the NWSL. And we realized if we were going to grow this, we had to tap into sort of all aspects of fandom. So it was about television. It is about digital rights and streaming. It is about all of the content surrounding that. We formed this joint venture, NWSL Media, which is a 50-50 JV, so that we had the ability to basically benefit from the growth of the league. And I think it represents sort of just thinking about these business opportunities in a more holistic way. Things used to be a lot more siloed, but now it really is about sort of truly capturing fans at all levels and all the revenue opportunities that come with it.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think, when you talk about a fan, if you just think globally for a moment, fans in general are very different from one group to the next. And, I think some of what we've done to react to that, one, we recently announced a partnership with Twitch in order to distribute our G League games. And, we think that's a really interesting opportunity because Twitch certainly has an audience that's very specific to Twitch and likes to consume content on that platform and in that format. In addition, we have introduced products and services such as Mobile View inside of our League Pass, which is the ability for someone to actually look at a very close angle. We installed new cameras in all 29 of our arenas. And what it does is we have a traditional broadcast camera and we've got a Mobile View camera. And we produce games in both formats. And we see that people are all over the board as to how they want to actually use that. And some folks really love it and some prefer the traditional broadcast. And so I think when you look at what are the behaviors of the fan base, it's hard to put people in one bucket or another as much as we think about the kinds of behaviors and appetite that they have for experiences and what they want to look at. And I do think that across the globe, we've got differences in the sense that in some markets, people are very new to basketball. And so while we all probably grew up here in the US to some degree playing basketball in our gym classes. Poorly, yeah. Absolutely, me too. But that being said, a lot of countries that's not the case. And so it's a much more kind of, laying the groundwork for understanding basketball and engaging school-age children in our junior NBA programs, all the way through to bite-sized content telling the stories of our players, and then into consuming a full game to say, okay, what's this all about now that I understand the sport a bit?
And it's interesting because, Evan, that how do you start domestically and go globally is almost the opposite for soccer in a certain extent, where globally it's so prevalent. Do you think in the opposite flow and how you go and get people in the US excited about soccer in new ways to participate?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're playing a little bit of both sides. We're trying to establish the NWSL in the United States. We have a long way to go. We're entering our 6th season. So, it's a 9-team league. We're trying to get visibility for the league. But that said, we realize sort of the global opportunity that is there. When Marta, who plays for Orlando, when we stream that game, the viewership that we have out of Brazil, reaches 20% of the streams at times for key games. So there certainly is a global opportunity that we're aware of. We are very conscious of tying our league to the World Cup in 2019 in a perfectly legal way. The 2019 World Cup is in France. A quarter of our league at least, so about 50 players, will be in that World Cup. Obviously, the United States rallies behind when the U.S. women's national team, is playing well in the World Cup. So we are trying to focus on the global aspect of the game, focus on the fact that we're the best league in the world. These women will be in the World Cup, and it's a great sport. You asked sort of, what is a women's soccer fan like? A women's soccer fan is a sports fan, is a soccer fan, period.
I think he brings up a really good point that as you talk about kind of globalization, there's also a hint of localization. Mm-hmm. So you bring up Marta in Brazil, likewise we have Ben in Australia, that while these storylines are extremely global and our content is very global and mostly resonates, there's also an appetite to have a very localized storyline that says when you have some number of players from Australia or from Brazil, people want to hear about their particular players in the league and what's happening with them. So I think, and that's, digital is made for that. Being able to localize down to a very specific level, I think is a great opportunity.
Yeah. Also a challenge sometimes to scale that, right? How do you make every local story across an entire audience personalized to that level? Location services, new technologies?
I think it comes down to, again, personalization, right? If you give so I forgot what the study was that came out last week talking about the rationale behind people subscribing. I want to say 30% of people subscribe because the content that they subscribe to is about their local news. And if you're talking about local, it's something that, your team might go up and down, may not be performing well, but you never stop liking your team. Never not care about your home city. And so we invest in a company called The Athletic, which is local subscription sports content, and they've done a phenomenal job in their working with some of the top writers. And the writers really are the catalyst to get people to subscribe. Because at the end of the day, the writers are the ones who have the personal relationship on a local level with the fans. The local fan, in my mind, is the most powerful in sports for the fact that purchasing power sits with them. And not only just a purchasing power, but we're talking from attendance to viewership to digital consumption to merch and apparel. I mean, that's kind of the holy grail, I think, for sports. It's really hard to figure out, but our whole approach, and the founders of The Athletic have done a phenomenal job in just creating a really simple, phenomenal product with the best writers that people care about. And if you can do that, that's at least kind of step one to getting people into the funnel and getting them and providing them the best content. If you provide good content over time, I think there are opportunities to do a lot more stuff. But kind of going back to the global nature, the NBA's done an amazing job of kind of creating momentum around talent globally, right? It is, obviously you have the use case of Yao Ming, but in several countries. Australia, I think, is the second largest league pass market outside the US, right? And that's a kind of a testament to the amount of talent, not just talent, but also the ability to capitalize on the storylines. So if you have a couple storylines, how do you play that up significantly to a point where you can get fans to buy into the sport and not just an athlete. And unfortunately, fortunately, if you look at men's soccer, for instance, there's pretty clear indicators that when the U.S. men's soccer team was moving further along in the World Cup, what was it, 4 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, the youth participation rate actually increased. And so if youth participation increases, those are the people over time who are probably going to be consumers and big fans of that sport. Now, I don't know, we'll see what the numbers look like after this year, but I'd be hard-pressed to assume that the numbers don't go down. I mean, sports is storylines. If you don't have the stories coming out there behind a Landon Donovan or behind a Bradley or Tim Howard, the kids just don't respond nearly as well. And if they don't start at a young age, it's hard to create fans over time.
Yeah. And to kind of pivot from these new models, so we've got engagement moving, different locations and geographies, experiences that are feeders into the fan base for participation purposes, different types of content developed. Who pays 10 years from now? What do the economics look like? How much do we shift direct to consumer in certain ways versus aggregators and distributors? What does the sort of value chain look like 10 years from now? Not just to watch the game, because certain scenarios you can go to Twitter and get highlights, and for me that might be good enough because it's between when I eat dinner and put the baby to bed. But in the future, what does that look like? How do you go and shift where investment goes? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so bite-sized content is, I think, something everyone's talking about. If it's not a team that you are a passionate fan of, it's really hard to envision someone watching a full game 10 years from now. I think highlights are very, very important. They're also very expensive to get a hold of if you're trying to get rights. But I think something like the NBA works with WSC, for instance.
Yeah,
and yeah, WSC is a really interesting technology that allows for, and you can speak to it a lot more intelligently than I can, but it creates for automated highlights, right? And if you only want to view certain highlights about certain people or certain key shots or a recap of the game, there's really no chance that you're going to watch a full 2 to 3 hour long game. So live's not going away. I think I can't imagine a time when people will not tune into the Super Bowl. I think it's craziness. And I think cable companies will still continue to bid pretty aggressively for rights. But I don't think in the age of, Snapchat that people are going to watch full games 10 years down the road. And I think the Snapchat SportsCenter stuff is an indication. I mean, their numbers have been through the roof in terms of engagement on that. So I think people really care to just get the info they want in a quick time frame.
I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. The majority of my Facebook Messenger traffic is from the NBA for highlights.
Okay.
But that's the impact of something like bots can have, right?
Right.
People always say, oh, well, bots are just, tells you the weather. But in reality, it's learning over time what you like. Once there's something that can feed you only the things you want, the question is, will you pay? I'm a firm believer that people pay for premium content. And, something about The Athletic, people always said, well, why would I pay for it when there are 1,000 articles written about my team? You pay for it because you believe it's the most premium content, the writer who you like, and the ability to get more in-depth data and analysis. So I think people pay for premium.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
Chris,
similarly,
yeah.
I think it's going to be a balance between partnerships with some of the big platforms and so forth, and direct to consumer. And I use this year as an example, quite honestly, that we're seeing significant double-digit uptick in our league pass sales, and we are also seeing we're up 15% year over year on broadcast viewing. So, we're in a really strong position on all platforms. And so I think it goes back to being where people want to be, and people are going to continue to want to consume on different platforms. And I think touching on the WSC technology, I think it really is a call for more actionable use of data. Mm-hmm. And so what really that technology does, similar to other technologies that you can imagine, is really take data and use that in order to create some value add.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real opportunity. You know, we have built a consumer data strategy inside the NBA and are really starting to activate against that, where we're trying to understand what a fan looks like from the time that they enter the arena to merchandise purchases, to how they're consuming our content, what they do like, what they don't like, and putting that together in the picture of a fan that says, here's what we think a fan looks like and how they want to consume. And then I think being able to act on that through technology and say, okay, therefore, and WSC is a great example where they're able to take an entire game and really dish out the exact highlights that you want to see of a given player or of a given team, and really continuing to build on that. So I think that's a great opportunity moving into the next 10 years is technology that takes data, there's a lot of it, and boils it down and makes it actionable.
And at that intersection of technology and premium experiences, right, the buzzwords and the buzz acronyms now are AR and VR. What do you see as those premium NBA experiences with those modalities in the future?
Yeah, so, you know, we, as you may have, you know, read, over the last 2 seasons, we have introduced a partnership with NextVR on virtual reality, and we're streaming 1 live game a week and sometimes more in League Pass. And I think that's great, but you know, you open it up about your wife asking you, why are you sitting on the couch with this thing on your head, and like, why are you not talking to me? And so I think that, you know, virtual reality is one particular technology. I think augmented is really interesting from the perspective that it can be consumed on a mobile device and it can be social with people gathered around. We launched last year an augmented reality app where people could actually do Pop-A-Shots. So whether they're in the arena and wanting to play in between breaks and so forth, or if they're sitting on their couch at home with friends and want to play, it's a great way to engage. I think it's the first step of many. You know, we announced obviously the Innovation Fund with Verizon and have done some other things like that with different technology providers to say, how can we use technology together with our engaged fan base to bring some really new and exciting experiences? And so I think in the work that we're doing with Verizon, we're going to be focused on that very thing, which is how do you build on that initial Pop-A-Shot game in AR to start to bring more content so that when you actually look at the arena, information pops up contextually about that given player, about his stats. Tonight's going to be a big game because he's breaking a record that you may not have otherwise known about. Or, you know, being able to source other content from other games that are going on at the same time and really having a fully interactive experience. So I think that's, you know, some of what technology will help us bring for an engaged fan base.
And Evan, for NWSL, what does that look like for the future of the 9-team league going into the 90-team league?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're trying to establish our base. We're like I said, we're entering our 6th year. We are trying to grow from 9 teams into 12 and beyond. I think one of the things, just to circle back sort of on the highlight point, you ask about 10 years from now, what are we looking at? And I think you're starting to see a lot of noise around sort of the life cycle of content or tracking the life cycle of a ticket or tracking and doing so through a ledger, right? So getting rid of the sort of cryptocurrency part, but taking the ledger. And this is not a sports example, but Jared Dicker from the Washington Post used to be their VP of Innovation. He just went to a company called Poet. And he's basically trying to set up a system where content, whether it's text, video, whatever it is, you're tracking that in an open ledger. And so you would be able to see the life cycle of that. And I think that has implications, a ton of implications in the sports world. If we get into this world where, you know, gambling, and I know the NBA is pushing for this, is part of sort of the sports world in a more formalized way, I think there's a lot of sort of tracking the life cycle of that as well. So it's very early stages. You might be able to speak to some of this, but I think it's interesting where sort of some of the learnings from cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and the ledger will play into our business.
What do you think, blockchain for sports content and data? You got Spotify buying a blockchain company.
Yeah,
where does that fit in the sports world?
I think to your point, it's not about Bitcoin, and I think that's what people normally associate it with. Blockchain is interesting for multiple reasons. It creates third-party validation for a product, allows for transparency. It allows you to scale a lot faster and a lot more seamlessly than you would otherwise. We recently invested in a company that is creating digital trading cards. And it's built on top of the blockchain, but doesn't necessarily, almost every other pitch you probably get has blockchain written into the deck. Some I think use
AI,
it.
blockchain.
AI, yep, computer vision. But the beauty of what they're doing is trading cards are still a massive business. You look at Topps, you look at Panini, you look at some of the large players. Question is, can you develop something for the digital age? So they're going after gamers initially. They're going after streamers, they're going after the esports teams. They'll then allow you to unlock a pack of trading cards, digital trading cards. There'll be skins in them, so there's external kind of like validation or monetary value there. And then you have the ability to list it out on the blockchain. So you can actually trade it or sell it or buy amongst third parties. So I think that's an interesting use case. We see a lot of stuff around ticketing for the blockchain to create more transparency, less fraud activity on ticketing, especially on the secondary market. Yeah, so there's a lot of use case, I think, around it. Poet, I think, is incredibly intriguing. If they can own the whole life cycle of content, there's massive value there. But we're constantly looking out for what's next around that.
How much is your blockchain trading card portfolio worth right now?
0 today, but hopefully soon.
But come back tomorrow, right?
Yeah, you never know.
So, the only thing I would say on blockchain is I think there's an interesting opportunity just to solve some basic challenges. On the global front, when you think about credit card adoption, from a US perspective, we can be very egocentric thinking about credit cards and, a subscription service and how do we pay for it? Well, of course, people will pay for with credit card. As that becomes, even I think there's pressure on that in the US, as people become less tied to credit cards, and certainly globally where there's just not the adoption of credit cards, how do you get to simple payment systems and, that have broad adoption and so forth? And so I think in there, some of the security behind blockchain and so forth, I think there's a great opportunity for technology on that front that's maybe not as exciting and, wild to think about, but it's certainly a fundamental need that exists.
And on the note of infrastructure, we're talking, and if you're at Mobile World or CES this year, 5G is a big ticket item, right? When you think about stadiums, when you think about venues, what are some of the trends that you're seeing there, and what are the opportunities with that type of tech?
Yeah, so I think as we talked a little bit earlier, Mobile World Congress just came back from Barcelona last week, and it was 5G everywhere. And it seemed to me that there were kind of a couple of groupings of conversation around 5G, which I think are interesting. One is, of course, Internet of Things, which is all about the connecting of all things and then gleaning great insights from that and doing something with it. The other being content. It's great for rich media. And so I think when you look at the venues, the ability to get great content from our venues to other places where we can edit, where we can interact, where we can create new experiences is kind of one angle. The other is, how do you think about the venue itself? And I think, probably starting with Levi's Stadium a handful of years ago, and really now looking at a number of our arenas and so forth that are being either built, rebuilt, redone, and really engaging the fan while they're in the venue. It's an evening out on the town, and so really engaging them from the time that they walk in with their mobile ticket, or that maybe even before when they arrive and they find the most efficient place to park, all the way through to mobile ticket is readily available at a moment's notice, to in-seat concession and merchandise and so forth. Right. Then stringing that back to how do you then get them the content they're interested in based on the preferences that they've indicated and so forth. So I think, there's a lot of opportunity. I think some of it has already begun, and I think some of it is yet to be seen from a 5G perspective.
Yeah. Evan, in a soccer, even in A&E world, how do that type of new capabilities change how you think about the future of content creation and distribution?
Yeah, so I'm less focused on the stadium side. I would echo what Chris said, though, about sort of remote production, how we handle the streaming and broadcast of these games. Right now, we're already doing a ton of remote production, and I just think as 5G and other technologies come into play, it'll just make it more seamless and efficient.
Cool. Well, I think we've got like 15 seconds to spare, and we'll let it dead silence, and we're done. So, thank you all very much. This has been a great start. I hope everybody got a good sense of, okay, what does the future start looking like? And I think we're going to bring up Amy next to move to the next panel, and we'll get a little bit more specific about each of the different areas of opportunity that we started talking about here.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.